quick video on second inversion chords today. Second inversion chords are a bit trickier to work with than root position and first inversion chords, and so I thought it would be worth just covering how we go about using these. So in order to really understand what we're doing with the second inversion chord, we need to go over consonants versus dissonance. So here I've just broadly labelled our intervals in terms of consonant intervals and dissonant intervals. So on the left-hand side, we've got our consonant intervals. These intervals sound stable. They sound nice, broadly speaking. Stable is sort of a much more precise term, so I'm going to stick with that. They sound stable. So, for instance, a third, that's a major third there, that sounds stable. There's no need to move from that particular sound. We can almost sit on that sonority for absolutely days. Absolutely fine. We have a fifth, likewise, that's stable. A sixth, again, that's stable. And an octave, which is absolutely stable. So these are our stable intervals. And then on the other side of the coin, we've got our dissonant intervals. These intervals sound unstable. They need to move. They need to resolve. So here's a second. That sounds unstable. That needs to resolve. Here's a tritone. Again, that sounds unstable. That needs to resolve. Here's a seventh. Again, that needs to resolve. I've sort of skipped over the fourth there, and the reason is that if I play that, actually, that's a sound that we wouldn't necessarily think of as unstable. But traditionally speaking, the fourth is treated as a dissonance, and so that's sort of where we're coming from, because the fourth is, kind of traditionally speaking, treated as a dissonance, especially within like those sort of sus4 chords, those suspended fourths that you might come across. Those kinds of sounds. We're going to treat the fourth as a dissonance, even though on its own it can sound relatively stable. So now that we've just covered consonants versus dissonance and consonant versus dissonant intervals, we can move on. So we're going to have a look at what a second inversion chord actually is. And so we've got a C major chord here in root position, first inversion and second inversion. And really, the deciding factor for whether what inversion a chord is in is the note that is in the bass. So here we've got a C major chord. In the first bar, it's in root position because the C, the root of the chord, is in the bass. In the second bar, we've got a C major chord in first inversion because the E, the third in the chord, the middle note in the chord, in the sort of the kind of close position triad, is in the bass. So it's in first inversion because the third is in the bass. In the final bar on that slide, we've got a second inversion chord because the fifth, the G in that chord, and the top note in that close position triad is in the bass. So that's what a second inversion chord looks like. That's in fact what all sort of the positions of the chords of a triad might look like. So second inversion chords are a problem because they contain a dissonance. Here I've popped in the intervals between each note in the triad and the bass note. So in root position, we've got an octave, a third and a fifth between each note in the treble clef and the bass. No problems there. They are all stable sounds. All good. Absolutely fine. In the next bar, we've got a first inversion chord. And again, we've got a sixth, an octave and a third between the notes in the top part and the bass. So if I just play that for you. Again, absolutely fine, all stable sounds. But the second inversion chord contains a dissonance. The C in the right-hand part there creates a fourth against the G, which is a dissonance. And because we've got a dissonance in that chord, this second inversion chords in general, must be treated with care. So I'll just play that again. There's our fourth. And it's that fourth that needs to resolve. So that's why second inversion chords need to be treated with a degree of care. We've got to be a little bit careful with them. Because they contain a dissonance, they should really be treated like a dissonance. They must be approached and left by step. They must be sandwiched between two consonants. And in most cases, they should appear in a weak place in the bar. So let's have a look at a few places where we might encounter second inversion chords, and then we'll have a look at some of these sort of as examples, and then we'll have a look at them in context. So the first one of these is a cadential second inversion chord. So this is really a progression that, you know, broadly speaking, you might already be really familiar with. You might be familiar with it in terms of its sound in any case. So here we've got in the first bar the second inversion chord. In this case, actually, this second inversion chord might appear on a strong beat in the bar. So this would appear on the first beat and then would resolve down to chord 1 again on the first beat. As the name suggests, this typically appears at perfect cadences, and you can see that it's kind of like a sort of a double appoggiatura at the top. The C resolves down to the B, and the E, this sixth, is kind of treated like a dissonance in this case. It resolves down by step to the D. So that's broadly speaking where we are. I should also just sort of apologise to all kind of first year university harmony tutors at this point. I realised I've called it 1C, and it's a battle that I faced when I taught first year harmony. That chord should really be thought of as 5/6/4, but I've labelled it 1C as a kind of just ease of reference for those, you know, studying GCSE and A-level music. That 1C 5/6/4 battle is one for another day. So there we are. There's a cadential second inversion chord. That's broadly speaking what we're looking at, and we'd expect a kind of 1C 5/1 progression. The next type is an auxiliary second inversion chord. So in this case, we start off with a root position triad. The third and the fifth in the root position triad pop up a step to form a second inversion chord, and then they pop down. So if I just play what's written there. So there we have it. We've got an auxiliary second inversion chord. And again, you can see that the voice leading here is really very good. We've got the third and the fifth of the chord in the first bar of this example, popping up a step and then popping down a step. So as far as treating this second inversion chord like a dissonance, we'll kind of tick those boxes. It's been approached and left by step, and it's sandwiched between two consonants. So there we go. We've got an auxiliary second inversion. And we might also see a passing second inversion chord. So here, we've got a second inversion chord in the second bar of that extract. And I'll just sort of play it through for you. So here we can see that the bass moves by step. The bass goes C, D, E. And the chord progression on top Goes from chord 1, 5 in second inversion, 5C, and then to chord 1 again. And you can see the bass moves by step, and actually the voice leading on the top part is fairly close as well. It's all mostly stepwise motion, and so this is treated like a dissonance again, as you'd want a second inversion chord to be treated. So those are our three types. We've got a cadential second inversion chord, an auxiliary second inversion chord, and a passing second inversion chord. I'm just going to play you a few extracts from some pieces now. So here's a cadential second inversion chord again. Oh, sorry, this one is a bit blurry, but I'll play it at the piano. Here it is. So this is in A flat major. We've got chord 1C in, yep, and then we go to 5/7. So there's our 1C, 5/7, 1. There's our cadential second inversion chord again. Here's an example of a passing second inversion chord. I'll just play this extract from the beginning of the phrase. Okay, so in the third bar there's our passing second inversion chord. We're going from 4B, 5, 1C, 4. So 4 in first inversion, chord 1C in the second inversion, and chord 4 in root position. So there we have it. There's an example of a passing second inversion chord. I think that's from the first piece of Tchaikovsky's album from the Young. Album for the Young even. And here's an example of an auxiliary second inversion chord. Again, I'll play the entire phrase and then we'll have a brief look at it. Okay, so we've got an auxiliary second inversion chord, and as we can see, we start with chord 1, and then we pop up to chord 4 in second inversion, and then back down to 1. The third and the fifth in the chords are just move up a step and then move back down a step to create that second inversion chord. So there we have it. Those are our three types of second inversion chord: our cadential second inversion chord, our auxiliary second inversion chord, and our passing second inversion chord. So here are just some general points to end on. They're not as common as root position or first inversion chords or triads, due to the fact that they are dissonances, and dissonances tend to be used more sparingly than consonant sonorities. They also really cannot be used as a substitute for a root position or a first inversion chord, so they contain a dissonance. And this tends to be a problem that happens quite often in pieces I look at GCSE. It's often the case that second inversion chords are not treated with any real distinction from first inversion or root position chords. So it's not unusual for me, for instance, to see a second inversion chord right at the as the first thing in the piece. Bar 1, beat 1. There's a second inversion chord. There's chord 1C usually. They must be treated like a dissonance. So they must be approached and left by step, sandwiched between two consonances, and usually on the weak beat of the bar. I've also just quickly listed our cadential our sort of main types of second inversion chords at the bottom. So we've got our cadential second inversion chord, an auxiliary second inversion chord, and a passing second inversion chord. So I hope that's all helpful. I hope that all makes sense, and I hope this is something that you can sort of use in your own composition and theory work. Thank you very much, and see you soon.